In this episode of the podcast, we're talking to Jerry Ghionis. So look, if you're in the realm of portrait and wedding photography, I don't think Jerry needs an introduction. Inside of this space, he's been absolutely revolutionary for this industry, from his own educational platforms to his involvement with WPPI and helping it to become a more successful trade show, to just all of the education and workshops that Jerry does. His work, as well as the mark that he's left on the industry, is noticeable from afar. So I am grateful to have Jerry on the podcast. He's been kind of a mentor from afar ever since I got into the industry, somebody that I very much look up to as both a person and photographer. So let's go ahead and just dive in. This is the TSS podcast. It's a place for authentic conversations to uncover the stupid, simple truths that help us succeed in business, create better relationships, and lead more fulfilling lives. Welcome to Think Stupid Simple. Jerry, welcome. We have a little ritual. We begin with the candle.
I feel like we're about to talk about the Kama Sutra with this candle.
We start with clothes on, but what you don't know is by 60 minutes in. No, I appreciate you taking the time to join us on the podcast. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure, mate. Anything for you. You've always been a great support for me and always been in my corner, and as I've been for you. So why would it stop here?
Well, I've honestly loved. I don't know that I've ever told you to your face, but I figure now that it's here and being recorded for posterity, I might as well. But when I first entered the industry, I saw quite a few really not so great examples of being a professional photographer. And then I was fortunate to run into John Solano, who would become one of my mentors, really one of my key mentors. And then you and your education, which would then be, I would say, my mentorship from afar. Your philosophies and your approach and everything has guided me from a distance long before I ever actually got to meet you face to face. So thank you for all of that.
That's an honor, mate. Absolute pleasure and an honor. If the history books will say anything to do with our names together, I'll be very proud. So thank you, mate. It means a lot to me.
What you've done, and I don't know if you know this, but I actually brought my copy of Darling. I can't remember exactly when I bought this. I think it was right when you released it. I was there at the trade show floor. I'm like, I got to have that book. But it's an incredible book. I was flipping through it today just before our call and or before this podcast. And one of the things that strikes me is that how long have you been in the photography industry?
So 27 years as a professional, 5 years before that as a hobbyist, and then 20 years teaching.
That's incredible. So this career, which is now professionally nearly spanning 30 years, and then this book that I'm looking through all of your work, and the work that is in the book maintains this timeless quality to it. It's frankly unusual, because usually, you can go and look at a professional photographer's work and see kind of the different trends and the evolution of like when they're shooting and what they're shooting. But what you've done over a 30-year period is not only changed the entire industry, but it's held up over time. And it kind of gave me my general topic, my idea for what I would like to chat with you about today, which is creating a career and a legacy that lasts. So I don't know that, I mean, I'm sure you don't stop to look at all these cool things that you've done, but from my perspective of looking at it, it's quite incredible.
Thank you, mate.
So what I wanted to talk about first, and this is, Jerry, this is a two-way conversation, so you can ask and say whatever you'd like to say. And this is a place for authentic conversations only. So please, if you have something offensive, say it. Like that, I want to preface it with that.
You know I talk a lot of shit. So, but when I say I talk a lot of shit, as in everyone who knows me, if you know me personally, I can be very strong, but I'm also very empathetic, but I'm also very cheeky. So they're the three traits that if you know me personally, there's three things are pretty are pretty obvious. So yeah, I
Yeah.
might drop an innuendo or two, or a joke or two, or talk a little bit of smack or two. I don't really know. Let's find out.
You know what's hilarious watching is when you join up on Clubhouse and people don't know Jerry and they think you're being serious. Like I've been in so many rooms where like you'll crack jokes and people will be like, "No, that's not really what I meant." And I've had to hear you say, I'm just giving you shit, man. It's okay." Like
I was on Clubhouse a couple of days ago, and someone said something really sweet and like elevating me in a certain way, and I'm like, dude, do you know what I'm wearing right now? I'm wearing like Star Wars pajamas from Target. Like, so, I'm wearing Baby Yoda on my pajamas. I'm a big kid. I mean, I've always been I've always been a big kid. You know, don't get me wrong. I mean, you know me, right? I can talk in front of hundreds or thousands of people to, for 14 hours at the same time, just talk shit just like the rest of us. But there's lots of parts to me, which I guess we'll probably find out in this call. But yeah, man, it's fun. I just, it's good to share and good to have fun.
absolutely. It's incredible. I've seen you lecture in front of packed auditoriums at WPPI and different conferences. I mean, there had to have been 3,000-4,000 people in those audiences. But at the same time, I feel like one of the things that makes you so successful as a photographer and an educator and a leader is the amount of empathy that you have in the way that you do everything. So despite being up there and teaching, you teach in a relatable way and you understand the audience that you're speaking to. And it's an authority with the sense of love that comes along with it, as opposed to like somebody who is only authoritative and you feel that sense of disconnect, between they don't really understand me or where I'm coming from. So I appreciate your relatability, my friend.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate it, Sue. Thank you.
And I also know that you can throw down. So
well, my philosophy is don't fire until fired upon, and I'll never give you shit based upon something that you're sensitive about. I'll just give you global shit.
Global shit. I like that.
Like, if you're sensitive about your weight, I'll never talk about your weight. If you're sensitive about this, that, whatever. But in terms
everything
of
else
you
is game.
say something that could be misconstrued, or you drop something that could be an innuendo, I mean, I'm going to bring attention to it. But I love it back, to be honest. People who don't know this about me, I love when people give me crap. I love it, because being Australian, Greek, and American, especially Greek, it's really who can outwit the other. You just talk and you like, who's going to one up each other on the joke or that game, and then it is what it is, so yeah.
Well, as someone who appreciates getting some shit, then I need to tell you this. You need to preface your education with a disclaimer that says something like, don't try to be Jerry, do your own version of you. Because I made a complete ass of myself trying to talk like, listen, my dear, I want you to go stand over there, darling, and people are like, you don't sound anything other than creepy right now. Like along with this beard and like my deep set Persian eyes and everything that, like, there needs to be something in your education that says, look, take these tools and use them wisely. Don't imitate. You can't pull off Jerry.
All right, so I've got to tell you the funny story. This is hysterical. So I'm there photographing a wedding, and then people don't understand that the Jerryisms or the Peter Hurleyisms or whoever it is that we're that you're sharing inspiration from. All of a sudden, on a wedding day, I couldn't get this couple to laugh, and at the top of my lungs, I just started singing Roxanne, and they started laughing, and then we just started. I was taking requests like, "Oh my God, Jerry, you can sing," or whatever, and I'm like, so I just start singing stupid shit, and then people would join in. I'm like, I finally broke them. Now, my assistant at the time was an ex-groom. His name was Howard. Is Howard, and anyway, so he assists us, and then he finally shoots wedding for our large studio. And sure enough, my brother was there with him. And then, so you've got this somewhat conservative, cool dude, but conservative-looking Asian guy, built no trust, did nothing, and then all of a sudden just went Roxanne, and then crickets, and my brother lost it, and he was like, "Why didn't it work?" I'm like, "Well, dude, you can't just buy me a metaphoric." Yeah, buy me a metaphoric drink. You've got to realize the nuances that lead up to that stuff, And people often say, "Well, Jerry, it's okay. You have a sexy Australian accent," and I'm like, "Well, I don't have an accent when I'm in Australia."
I love that story, yeah. And I can relate to it 100%. And side note, that song Roxanne? That's The Police, because I feel like we are going to have a lot of listeners that may never have heard that song before. There's a moment in that song. There's a moment in that song where he screams Roxanne. And when I was young, we'd be listening to that song with my dad in the car, and it was just me and my dad. But every time it got to that part in the song, he'd say, "Okay, this is where Sting has his balls grabbed by somebody really hard." And you could hear it like in his voice. So like every time I hear Roxanne, I think of Sting getting his balls grabbed.
I will
really
forever. That song will be forever ruined by that visual.
Yeah, I just thought I'd add that to the value of our conversation. But so Jerry, on a slightly more serious note, going back, you actually started in fashion, right?
So yeah, I was given my first camera at the age of 15 by my brother Nick, and my uncle had dabbled in professional photography, certainly a hobbyist. My other uncle in the Air Force, he did Air Force photography, but so yeah, I became obsessed very quickly with the art form. And my brother had a dark room, and then seeing that first image come out through the chemicals and that intoxicating smell and that intoxicating feeling, that's sort of how it happened. But cut a long story short, I did it as a hobby, like relentlessly from the age of 15 to 20 odd, and I still do it really as a hobby as well as for work. But then I worked at a few camera shops just to be in the game after high school. There was a 4-year photography course. It was funny because the college that I wanted to go for, they rejected me because I wasn't good enough. I'm like, well, that's why I'm coming here to learn.
Such
even
a weird
though that
thing.
I developed it's almost like yeah, well, that's what you're here for, but no. So RMIT in Melbourne, the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, like that was sort of one of the gold standards in photography industry, but they didn't accept me. So there was a 4-year course. So I basically did that, but I quit after a year because they were teaching me what I call the algebra of photography. Like it was a lot of darkroom stuff, and I enjoyed that, but everything was very deep and introspective, and deep in a way that it was just almost obscure. Like, you got to save the world through the lens of your camera. I'm like, yeah, but how do you make people look pretty? How do you? I know it probably sounds shallow, but how do you light? How do you pose? How do you communicate? What's the business of photography? So I quit, and at that point I ended up assisting a photographer for about 1.5 years, just with no pay. I just knocked on the door of a busy studio in the Italian district of Melbourne, and I said, I've always admired your work. I'd love to carry your bags, and I did that for 1.5 years, and then I shot my first wedding. They asked me to work for them full time, which I did. And I was there for about 3.5 years before, the next part of the story. But I chose wedding photography as my photography genre because I'm like, well, everyone gets married. I love being at a wedding. So it was a very pragmatic choice.
Okay.
Liking weddings, loving people. And also I felt even back then, I had the foresight to understand that if you can shoot a wedding well, you can pretty much shoot anything well. Like, I think it's the best genre of photography to learn from, even though it's probably not the genre that most people will go for. I think it's the best one to learn from because, look, let's face it, when you're shooting a wedding, take the veil off, it's a portrait. You photograph children's, families, your newborn, once the veil comes off, it's a portrait. Once the clothes come off, it's boudoir. She gets pregnant, it's maternity. She has a kid, it's newborn. They grow up, it's children.
Between the detail photographs, which are architectural stuff, landscape stuff, everything else is product based.
weather
I couldn't agree
constraints,
with you
time
more.
constraints. Yeah, all that stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I kind of feel like to find a career where you can have longevity, where you can create a legacy, you have to match it back to the core values of the individual. Like you found
100%.
photography as an art form. You appreciated the process, and that's what kind of kept you in it. But you have to find the subject matter that matches the personality of the individual if you want to stick around long enough to actually do something. And I remembered you had a background, or at least from your education, I remembered that you said that you approach a lot of posing from the standpoint of fashion, and it shows in your work. And I was wondering how that experience kind of made its way into the process. So you said you started with the wedding studio. Did you go at that point and then photograph fashion and editorial, or how did that kind of work its way into your style?
Well, yeah, I guess at the end of the day, it wasn't really from that perspective, it wasn't premeditated. There's certainly, when I first began, from the age of 15 up until the point I decided which genre. But at 15, I just wanted to shoot pretty girls. I mean, let's face it. you know, why
There's not
wouldn't
a lot
you?
of deep thinking at 15, that's for sure.
No, no, there's not, you just want to see some curves and boobs and butts and things like that. So let's just face it, right? Um, but of the little research that I had done, it's a tough industry to get into, even though it's even tougher now because there's very few house photographers for magazines, arguably not at
Yeah.
all. I mean, these days, a lot of my fellow Nikon ambassadors who work for Time Magazine and Newsweek and Sports Illustrated, you name it. I mean, things are drastically different. And even
Yeah.
a lot of current fashion photographers get their work by doing a personal project and then pitching it to a magazine. So
Interesting.
basically back then, I was very logical, even though as a kid, and I'm still this this big child. I was very relentless with my focus. So I quickly you know what? I don't think fashion would be an easy approach. Let me start with weddings for the reasons that I mentioned. One, I enjoy, the event. I enjoy people. I enjoy weddings, whatever. And I think it'd be a great way to learn the craft.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, this is a little known fact and something that I've never shared. Um,
Ooh, heard it here
so
first.
I got approached by a modeling agency and I literally just signed with the modeling. I mean, you might look at me now and think, what the hell, Jerry? Like, you're not that pretty. But anyway, I got approached by
Oh,
a modeling agency.
you were the model.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
I
yeah,
could totally
yeah.
see that. I
So,
said how good you look when we first got on the podcast, man. Could totally
well,
believe
they
that.
said, Jerry, we would like you to model ski masks. And I'm like, really? No. No. So, but this is no bullshit. This is the absolute truth. And I actually forgot this story, but I got approached by a modeling agency. I did my first test shoot to see if, I was good on camera and all that kind of stuff. And then they said, yep, Jerry, we're going to sign you. And that is the very week that I started working with the photographer. And I'm like, no, this is stupid. Let me just, because I thought to myself,
Interesting.
I would learn a lot as a model from photographers and I could be
Sure.
exposed to so many different things and that would be pretty good, even though that it wasn't my choice, as in, oh, let me be a model and be fun. No, someone
Yeah.
approached me and I don't have the photographs, but I've got them in a storage unit somewhere. And I remember Melissa sort of seeing them. It's like, oh my God, it's crazy. And, oh, how cute, whatever. And I was very young. Nowhere near as good looking as Peter Hurley is certainly back in the day and the abs and all that shit. So that's just not going to happen for me.
Peter's kind of ridiculous. Yeah.
It is ridiculous. So yeah, that's what basically happened. So the fashion element, how did that come about? Well, look, even though most of the time you just find me wearing a black V-neck T-shirt, I love fashion. I love the process. And to be honest, the last several years, I'm a stylist. I know how to put things together. I know what works. I just have a natural eye for it. Like even a week or 2 weeks ago, I actually photographed a singer, an incredible black country female singer, and I did my first music video.
That's
And
rad.
I'm like, we've got to go shopping for it. I know
Yeah.
exactly what would work for you. And so we went out, and it was literally like a movie montage. And I walk in there. I knew the stores to go to because I've got an extensive wardrobe that I have for my clients in my place. And straight away, I'm like, boom, 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 and 9 out of the 10 things was perfect for her, let alone it suited her. So what's happened in the wedding industry, shooting weddings, I just love that glamorous approach. See, don't forget, in Australia, we didn't have the pillars in the community in the photography industry here in America, because I think like the likes of Monty Zucker and like that
Sure.
sort of generation were very, very, very classically trained photographers.
Yeah.
And a lot of the photography back then, especially in the US, was very much like the cover of Step Brothers, the movie, right?
Yes. Yes.
We all know that vision that we think. I'm not discounting it. I think that the Americans, again, when several of the Australians came into the visual vernacular, so to speak, of the industry here, yes, it was very technical and it was very classical, but it was missing that fashion editorial approach. And fashion is really a faux pas, because you look at a Vogue magazine and these models are doing these really stupid, obscure things that mean
Hmm.
absolutely nothing, but it looks sort of real. Like you could have happened to be there at the right place at the right time as this girl did this.
Yeah.
So, so what happened was that I just naturally gravitated, especially my early career, to bold color, to just beauty in a very beautiful, glamorous, sensual kind of a way. But I wasn't like, I didn't really model myself after um, a particular photographer. But that being said, yes and no. My biggest inspiration was still Herb Ritts.
Mm.
So Herb Ritts,
Yeah.
Ritts. A lot of people won't
Incredible
know who
photographer.
he is, but you look back at his legacy and body of work. I mean, he was responsible for popularizing the original supermodels. And if you look at his work, like, oh my God, he did that, he did that. So
Yeah.
that he's been my biggest influence in my career. There's no doubt. I even I told a friend, and the friend of mine, John, he actually sent me an original Pirelli calendar, the year that Herb Ritts did the calendar, because every year that they get a very famous, well-known photographer to do it, and
Yeah.
it's sitting there right on the right-hand side of me, and it happened to be the year that I started professionally, so it was a very meaningful gift. But yeah,
That's
so
wild.
that's what it was. So I just gravitate towards making people look and feel beautiful, and I didn't really have a preconceived notion and too many people in front of me that said that, well, this is just the way you have to do it. Because now, if you search for how do you photograph a bride, or how do you photograph a groom, or whatever it is that you do, you'll have so many different options and people to give you shortcuts to a particular perspective and a vision. Back then, there was no internet. There
Yeah.
was only books, and there
Yeah.
wasn't many workshops. So I'm like, well, I don't know. Well, shit, how would I shoot a wedding? I don't know. Let me just go there and make it look pretty.
People were also very closely guarding their knowledge and their secrets. I don't feel like back then people were very willing to even share these things with others.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, even the photographer that I worked for, the one and only boss that I had, um, he didn't really teach me. I just observed. He wasn't like,
Yeah.
well, let's talk about lighting today. Let's talk about posing today. It wasn't about that. It was. I found I learned so much more without a camera in my hand, because it was how to relate to people, how to have fun, how to balance. It's basically how to problem solve. I mean, really, a wedding is made up of 1,000 problems you have to solve on the fly. So,
Hmm.
yeah, but the education, I just thought, well, logically, well, how would I make a bride look slimmer? How would I make a jawline look sharper? And a lot of it was self-taught, in a sense that I just did it by making mistakes and all those different things. So, you know,
Interesting. So you had a few years of working with that wedding studio, and then did you work in like as a fashion editorial photographer for a time? Like you said that you modeled, but were you in that side of the industry professionally?
no, no. So I never did. So I'm not too sure where you may have heard that or seen that. I mean, I've done fashion photography as a result of my weddings, and I've dabbled in that here and there. It's
I
been a
see.
heavy focus in the past 5 years. Um, I've,
I,
I've I've sort
I
of changed my whole body of works in the last 5 years, but no, not really. No, I've been shooting weddings and portraits consistently for my entire career. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I for some, maybe it was way back, but I've always seen that piece of your. And granted, I've only seen your career over the last decade, but it's always been the poses and the knowledge and the lighting and the things that you do. In fact, maybe Mike, can you pull up Jerry's website so we can take a look at some of his work? The work that you do is incredible, and it always, you can feel this fashion pull and this fashion influence. I mean, look at these, like that image that's over portrait albums, even the wedding gallery image right in the center. You know, everything has this sort of editorial fashion flair to it. So I had always kind of painted this picture in my mind that Jerry was a fashion photographer turned wedding photographer.
No, I was wedding. Wedding was my first genre that I basically approached, but I see it as a compliment because, you know,
It is.
Yeah, I love the idea of being able to cross that genre. At the end of the day, you know, my mantra is basically, if the magic exists, I capture it. If not, I create it. And
Yeah.
fashion photography, and here's the thing too, though. I believe that you photograph the way you are as a person. So if you're an asshole, your work will be missing a little bit of soul because you're not emotionally connecting with who you're photographing. It'll be very surface driven. So for me, because I just love bringing out the best in people. So that was just a innate, natural thing that I love. Like for me, I have
Yeah.
a nurturing side to me. So if I have a camera in my hands, whenever I'm photographing a bride, if you were my wife, how would I photograph you?
Hmm.
If, and then I often teach, like, you know, photograph through the eyes of a loved one, and you'll only ever see beauty. And it makes you look at people different ways. So if I photographed the bride through the grandmother's eyes, it'll be very different than photographing through a lover's eyes. So I have this balance of a very creative sort of soft feminine energy that comes out of my work. At the same time, I can be very analytical and pragmatic about the approach, but I think that there's a step to everything. So when you photograph, there is an order in which I do things that helps me sort of guide my process. But
Yeah.
yeah, the fashion element, yeah, that it's basically just to bring out the best in people. Let's make it glamorous, you know. And for me, I was exposed to a lot of fashion magazines when I was younger. Like I wouldn't buy the car magazines. I wouldn't buy the techie crap and all that kind of stuff. You know, that doesn't interest me. But I would buy Vogue and Harper's Bazaar and American Photo all day long. So
That's
you
so
know
interesting.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that drive that you have behind the camera to document and photograph somebody as if they were a loved one. I mean, I have seen you work, and I can see, even, you know, working with anybody, whether it's a man or woman in front of you, a model, a older lady, it doesn't matter. There's always this love and empathy that's coming forward, and it makes complete sense to me. Like when I look at, like, okay, if you're going to be a wedding photographer, having an empathetic eye, a love for people, an appreciation of bringing out the best, seeing people in this way is the core value that ties to that specific job. Because it doesn't make sense. I mean, how often do you hear wedding photographers complain about wedding photography and say, I can't wait until I never have to shoot another wedding again? And I'm sitting here going, like, this is not the right thing for you. Like, you
No.
have mismatched who you are with what you're doing.
Yeah, it's very rare that people choose this industry for the money only. Like there's many jobs that you'll do just for a job. It pays the bills. Ironically enough, people don't know this about Melissa. So Melissa's been a photographer. I mean, she was a photographer like, man, 11 odd years before we got together. And
That's
she
wild.
only got into it. She got into photography. She was a paralegal, and her ex-husband, or her husband at the time, was a photographer and said, well, hey, you know, I think I can do really well for the business, but I can also photograph. You know, I can learn it, but she
Yeah,
never got into it because that burning desire to photograph. And now, as you know, you meet her, she's got this incredible warmth and
absolutely.
joyful spirit, arguably second to none, that is so beautiful. But ironically, she will admit she is not creative. She knows how to get people joyful. She knows how to, you know, do the wedding party and all that kind of stuff, but you won't see her doing such incredible creative work because that's just not her. She's very much a rule follower and a
Hmm.
doer, but she's quite an anomaly in many ways. But yeah, yeah, but she got into the business for business, not because she's dying to photograph. And then when we got together, she's like, well, why would I, you know, photograph with when you're doing it? So she manages our businesses now, and all our entities, and she loves it because she loves the organizational part, and she's just incredible what she does with
Yeah,
all that she manages. So yeah.
I think Melissa responded to my my email to you, and I was like, oh, this is great because I wanted to invite Melissa on later onto the podcast as well. I was like, it'd be really fun to hear what the business side of what you guys do looks like. But that that empathy, if I were to walk it backwards, I generally find from a human psychology, I'm a huge fan of human psychology. But from a human psychology standpoint, I feel like those that are generally empathetic, that really have a strong ability to put themselves in other people's shoes and to see through their eyes, they've generally gone through pretty difficult things in their childhood. Things where they have to just sit there and observe, and they have to watch because there's usually careful repercussions. There's bad negative repercussions if they don't observe what's going on. Do you find that to be the case? Like, are there specific events in your childhood that might have helped to develop that sense?
Yes and no. So there's nothing really. Well, I guess let me explain a bit about my childhood, and then you might, identify what you're looking for, I guess. But I had, oh my light just turned off. Anyway, no big deal. I don't have an edge light there anymore.
You
What
don't
on
have
earth
an
is
edge
going
light.
on? I don't.
We
I
got to
don't.
stop.
I mean,
We can't do this
it's
anymore.
just I can't work like this. So, so let me explain a bit about me growing up. My childhood was probably one of the best childhoods you can possibly ever really entertain. From birth till I was about 12, I just think about my childhood, and it was a montage of us having a party almost every single week. We're a Greek family in Australia, but my mum and dad, I mean, mum would be dancing on, dad's shoulders, we'd be dancing on the furniture, we'd be breaking plates. The record player would be friggin' going, there was a lamb on the spit almost every single week. I mean, we had an incredible childhood. And I'm very thankful, very grateful, as I realized, and we were that house. We were the house that you can just show up any time of day or night, and we could make a feast for you, and we all loved it. And we were known as that no one could party like the Ghionises.
Hmm.
So from that perspective, yeah, and we lived in a very nice neighborhood, um, and yeah, life was good. Dad was in the food and entertainment industry. Like he operated a nightclub. So any big Australian band that you probably know in the US, he's hosted them at his nightclub. And I remember every morning after, like, because obviously he'd always sort of come home very, very late. Every morning he would we would go back to the place, and we'll try to look for money for just cash and coins that everyone would lead after. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was part of my childhood, sort of growing up. And then my dad went from the nightclub industry to food, to chicken shops, to fish and chip shops, which is a bit of a cliche when it comes to if you're a Greek
Hmm.
family in Melbourne, Australia, you're probably going to be owning a fish and chip shop. It's a cliche, but it's true.
It's like Indian
So
families, Mediterranean, Middle Eastern families, and Indian families get 7-Eleven here in the States. That's our jam. So this is the equivalent.
it's exactly right. And people get offended about, like, what? It's just true. Why do you get offended by the cliche? It's just true. Greeks are loud. We are loud. But anyway, so that happened. Anyway, at one point, times were getting tough. Recession was hitting. It was getting to a point where, mum needed to work. So mum got into the fashion industry. She was,
Ah.
and when I say fashion, not so much in the glamorous way. It was basically she's always been. It's been amazing. I can't even believe what mum had done. She went from literally just sewing, clothes, that she would get a
Hmm.
bundle of patterns, and then she would basically sew them, and then all of a sudden she's owning this factory. And then
That's crazy.
part of my childhood from 12 till 20 was being in a van, and then my brother would basically roll the material. You know what I mean? Like, you get these huge ass tables, and the material would have to be, very carefully placed on top of each other. Then you'd have a pattern, and then you'd have this sort of guillotine that sort of cuts around the material. Then you get the instructions, and Nike and Bollé and many other companies would hire my mum and the team, and then we'd drive it out to people, 20 minutes away, half an hour, 40 minutes away. And then sometimes, there'd be a mistake and you'd have to unpick like shorts or tracksuits.
Yeah.
So they'd come back. So every holiday I'd have a weekend, I'd freaking have to unpick these 1,000 shorts. So that was a lot of my childhood. But it wasn't really, there was no question. It wasn't like I've got a choice. This is just what you do, So it's either working at the fish and chip shop on a Friday night and a Saturday with my dad, or helping mum out with the material. Now, my two brothers both got in the food industry. So they both worked at the fish and chip shop. So they both quit high school and at the age of 15, 16, worked full time at the shop. I was the anomaly because I said, screw it, I want to be a photographer. I only finished high school, not because I needed it, because I'm like, I might as well finish high school, because I might need my graduation certificate, but I don't need my certificate to be a photographer. So I just had fun. I was an incredible C+ student.
Interesting. Wait, so I'm going to guess that you were the youngest. Were you the youngest of your brothers?
I am the youngest, yes.
Okay.
So the funny thing was that, what was I saying? So I was a social butterfly. So, you've got the geeks over here, the druggies over here, the Greeks, the Italians, the Asians, the Aussies. I was friends with all of them. I played sport with them. I laughed, and I was a social butterfly, which probably helped me in my photography. Now, where I'm going with this will sort of make you understand that I'm probably an anomaly, in a sense that there was a point there that the recession got so bad, that my parents were overseas trying to make money. So mum had sort of graduated and she was getting things done and leather jackets done in Pakistan. So she would learn the culture and she'd be living in Pakistan for a year or two. My dad was, busy in the chicken shops, even out of town and almost interstate at these 4-hour away shops. And I'm in this house on my own, this big house that I grew up in. So the only way I fed myself was I had a supermarket credit card. So I could go to the supermarket, get food and come back. And that's how I fed myself. But then it got so bad financially that there's times where I'd play squash, which is like racquetball, a different version of racquetball in Australia, with my brother. And like, I always used to beat him. And one day he's like, I beat you. I'm like, yeah, because I've had nothing to eat for like 2 days.
Oh, man.
And so the recession hit so hard is that interest rates were like 28%. Like, you think about it, right?
Crazy.
Interest rates here like 2-3% or 1% or whatever, like 28. So they're trying to make money and save the house.
Yeah.
And now, so mum and dad got estranged and had a lot of friction. And then it got to the point where a year before I got married the first time, dad just left. And it's the first time he ever dropped me off at school. And I'm like, this is weird, Dad. Like, why are you dropping me off at school? I'd always do the bus, but he dropped me off. He didn't really say goodbye in a sensitive or empathetic kind of a way. It was just weird. So he dropped me off at school. And by the way, I was in a private school. And then when the recession was hitting, I'm like, Mum and Dad, I don't need a private school. You're wasting your money. Just let me go to the public school. So I volunteered to go to the public one. And then, then the recession hit. And then one day, the van that we had driven all these years got repossessed because the bank took it. Then I get home one day, the water turns off. Next day, electricity turns off, the gas turns off. And then finally, like, I'm freezing, I can't have a shower, and I get home and the locks were changed. So here I was, 19 years of age, engaged to be married, and my parents were overseas. I go to the front door and I'm like, well, what do I do now? I can't, all my stuff is in there. What do I've got no car. It got repossessed. So I broke into the house because I knew there was a window that couldn't latch properly. So I knew how to get in, rented a place and rescued our belongings, at least that I could salvage anything that you could shake out of the house. So that's sort of a quick story of, my story per se.
I feel like that literally hits right on to that empathetic button, my friend. I mean,
Yeah.
you had a great childhood, and it's not to say that those that are empathetic have not had a great childhood, but it's to say that there's been a series of different things. One being that
Yeah.
you're the youngest. So usually the youngest tends to be the observational one, the one that like looks around and makes sure that brothers aren't going to beat him up, and like, just always paying attention type thing. But add to that, like, you're helping in the family businesses, so you can empathize with your parents who are trying to provide a living in two different industries. It looks like you probably developed an eye for fashion beginning with your mom, and kind of the fact that she sews and produces clothing, and you're seeing clothing from a young age. And then going through that series of traumatic events through the recession and up to, getting married. And that was actually one of the places that we had recently connected, or recently reconnected, was when I was going through my divorce a few years back.
Yeah.
You were a huge, unforeseeable source of support in that whole event. I don't remember how it even happened, how it came to we were on the phone. I don't remember how we were on the phone, but you spent an hour with me talking about
I
all
remember
of it.
specifically. I remember specifically because I had met you in industry events over the years, and certainly had respect for you and what you created. And we had never sort of spent quality time together. We had certainly mutual respect, and we had spent little pockets of time.
Hmm.
And I remember you. I think you sent me a message. I think it was an email or some. I don't normally check my Facebook messages. There's just too many to answer. And anyway, I saw your name and it just happened to come up. And then, you told me a bit about what you were going through and needed a sympathetic ear and understanding. And then I'm like, yeah, man, give me a call. So I gave you my number, and then you called me within a second. And then, yeah, I remember where I was sitting exactly at the time where I was speaking to you. So I remember it vividly. Yeah.
Yeah. So the experiences that you've had, I feel like have very much prepared you, aligned you with the values of somebody that can document and photograph with love, with intention, with all the things that you do. But it's interesting how, at such a young age, you were able to kind of fall into that. I find that usually in somebody's 20s, they don't fall into that thing. It's usually more like in their 30s that they start kind of piecing these things together.
I think it's a good observation. I think, though, I mean, I'm sure that in your podcast, you'll often talk about nature and nurture. Like, you're
Sure.
born a certain way. Let's just face
Sure.
it. Like, I've got two puppies. One is a sweet protector, and one is a entertainer. Like, they're just
Absolutely.
born a certain way, and you could nurture them a certain way, but their nature is their nature. My nature has always been very caring, but it's
Hmm.
funny. Like, I remember growing up, like sometimes I'd be a little bit more frugal with my money, just so because I had dreams. Like, I
Hmm.
remember buying a shitty house for 60 grand, and I hated every second of it, and I hated the suburb that I bought it in. And my brothers would tease me that I wouldn't want to spend money on crap, because I've always wanted to live in an apartment overlooking the city. And they would even be teasing me, like driving on the way to my place for a barbecue. They'd say, "Oh, I'm going to get my passport stamped just to get to your place." And it was only like 15 minutes from their place,
Yeah.
but it's considered in a suburb that's a bit outer. And I'm like, and then 5 years later, I sold it. And then I bought a shell of an apartment building, an apartment area in Melbourne. And sure enough, I was in an apartment and overlooking the city. So from that perspective, it's weird because I was never known in my family as the growing up. My brother John, who's the middle one, he was always known as the backbone of our family. He always brought us together.
Hmm.
um, and and both brothers are amazing. Like, Nick is also an established photographer, an amazing guy. He's about 10 years older than me, but he would always take us bowling, take us to tennis. He would always make time for us, even though that he was, young, good looking, and he would always, be with the girls. He always made time for us. John was 2 years older than me, and we would always, you know, play sport together, and he would always, get me in trouble and, fart on my head and all the usual stuff that brothers do. But so what I'm getting at is that I I was a kind of person also that if you told me to do something that was expected, the minute you verbalized it, it made it less meaningful. Therefore, it doesn't count anymore. Perfect example.
Oh,
Like my auntie gives me a treat, a Greek dish or something. And then
yeah,
I'm about to say, oh my God, thank you, Thea. Like, thank you, auntie. And my mum would say, pese faristo, like, say thank you. And I'm like,
yeah.
no, no, no.
Doesn't mean
And I
something
would
when you say it.
sit. No, I'm like, so I was young enough and but logical enough and street smart enough to know. Well, that's just stupid. It's a hollow appreciation because you told me. I was
Yeah,
about to say it, but so for me, if you and to this day, if someone says to me, Jerry, photograph my wedding for free, no, screw you. Even if it's a friend,
yeah,
I do it under my terms. Like if I love
for
you
sure.
and I would die for you, I'm not going to charge you. I'm going to go and photograph your wedding and die for you. But if you're that quasi friend or that acquaintance and you expect it, I'm like, no, no,
Yeah,
because you're expecting it. I can't do it for you. So I have this internal code that I've been living by my whole life. The ironic thing about the empathy is this, and you know a bit about this, and maybe that's maybe where you'll go at one point in this conversation. But having grown up very, very religious, getting married at the age of 20,
hmm,
I very quickly found out that in 2 weeks' time, I knew I married the wrong person. So being religious, divorce was never an option. Adultery was never an option. Like
yeah,
breaking up, divorcing was never an option. So arguably what helped made me good at what I do or experienced or relentlessly focused is because I had no joy at home. Even though that, yes, there was a time there that we were pretty happy. But being married to a wedding photographer is a pain in the ass because you would see clients at night, you would shoot weddings and weekends.
hmm,
And if you get good, like as in get busy really quick, you're busy. Like I did 100 weddings on my own for many years in my career. So
yeah. That's insane.
granted, granted I'm not saying it's all her fault, my fault, whatever. It doesn't. That's not the point. I just knew I probably wouldn't be where I am today because if I was married to Melissa from the beginning, let's say, I probably wouldn't be as successful in the industry,
Hmm.
but I would probably have 3 kids by now and be super happy and be successful in probably the more meaningful way rather than, hey, look at me, people know me. Well, that's a stupid. So, yeah.
Our stories are eerily similar on that side. And I remember when we were talking, I mean, down to like timeline, like I was 22 when I was married. Again, come from a deeply religious background, first Muslim and then Mormon, and it was 2 weeks into my marriage when I realized the same thing. And I feel like that's a huge part of why I fell in love with wedding photography later in my life. It was this moment where I could celebrate love and I could see it and I could document it. And then there was a sort of sadness whenever I'd go home that wasn't actually what was at home. And I would wait for the next moment to be able to go back and relive it again. But it's that same drive and that same motivation that like not wanting to be home made me very good at what I did at the studio in the office and in our education. So it's super interesting. I 100% agree with you that you can't deny nature. There's intrinsic pieces of who we are dialed into our DNA, but at the same time, that nurture aspect is such a significant piece of the values that end up developing over time. So
Yeah.
walk me back a little bit, because I do want to talk about that a little bit more, but going back to you work for that studio, and then when did you actually kick off your own business? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so basically, so I worked for that studio. It was about a year and a half, like I said, that I carried the bags. And while I was doing that, I was at college. And then after that year, I quit. And then I worked at a few camera shops, sort of intermittently, sort of around and before and after that.
Hmm.
But about 3.5 years into the studio that I used to work for, I just asked for a pay rise. I remember to this day the exact net income that I got every week. It was $345.97. Like that was my weekly wage. Now I got paid
Yeah.
extra for the weddings, but that was what I got paid. Now I'm like, I'm a man with dreams. I can't do anything with that. Like
Yeah.
I appreciate the fact that I can learn the craft and do whatever, but I was waiting a year and 2 years and 3 years, and then finally, like, just can you help me out a little bit? I'd really appreciate it. And my ex boss said, look, I can't afford it. I'm like, well, look, I was the head photographer at this point. I'm doing all the album plans. I know you can afford it, and I know that the value, if ironically, the whole destiny of my career probably would have been different if he said, yes, here's another
Here's your
couple
raise.
$100.
Yeah.
Anyway, so after 3.5 years of that, I quit. Now think of this. I'm like, no problem, mate. I've done how many weddings in my 3.5 years? This will be easy. I left. I'm like, wait a second. I don't have a single image to my name. It's all the
Oh
studio's
man.
photography. So basically, what happened was that I had no images to my name. So I'm like, well,
Yeah.
now what? And at that point, the recession was hitting. So what do I do now? Now, so this is what I used to do. I would go to friends whose wedding I had photographed, beg and borrow to borrow their album, drive to a prospective client to show them my work. Because back then it wasn't like,
Oh
look at my
wow.
website. It wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Now, my first studio, it was a frame shop in an obscure suburb in Melbourne that used to frame my work. And when I used to pick up my frames, it was a pretty big place because it was in the suburbs, but it was enough place to have a table and to meet clients rather than seeing in my home. So I'm like, I see all these empty frames here. Why don't I give you my photographs that will help sell your frames, and it'll actually help sell me, and just allow me to come here 1 or 2 nights a week.
That's genius.
Obviously, going to a prospective client and as into a client's home and that frame shop, that shit was always going to get old. So I'm like, I need a commercial space, but don't forget, we had just lost everything, and I've barely got 2 cents to rub together. What do I do? Now, my brothers,
This
Nick
is
and
when you
John,
were
they
20,
opened.
or how old were you at that time?
Yeah. So this was about when I was around about 23. So I had
Okay.
lived in that. I had been renting for quite some time, just trying to make ends meet because, like I said, when we lost the house, I got married after a year, and then we moved into a place and we rented it for a few years. So so in other words, I'm renting now at this place. I'm working at this studio. Then I quit. I'm still in this rental place, but where do I go now? So then my brothers at the time, and this was when I was about 23, 24, 23, 24, my brothers opened up a chicken shop, a charcoal chicken to go food store.
Yeah.
And then they were on a corner of a building. So in their storeroom on the other side of the road, there was a separate door and window. And I said, guys, if I build a wall in your storeroom, can I occupy this space? And it was the size of a bedroom.
Yeah.
I, I, so I barely had enough money to have a carpenter come in and build the wall, and I gave my brothers $100 rent, like a week. So great. Then we could be together as a family. We could, we wouldn't eat the chicken. We'd get friggin' steaks and chops, and
Yeah.
every day there was sort of like a communal sort of lunch that we all had. It was fantastic. It was a really
That's
good
awesome.
time. And then I couldn't afford the furniture. I'm like, what do I do? I couldn't even afford the plaster on the other side of the wall. So I'm like, well, creatively, how am I going to enclose this glorified bedroom? So what I thought was I shot a pretend wedding on 6x7 transparency because I was shooting back in the day with an RB67 Mamiya. Then what I did was I bought, what, like translucent core flute that sign writers use, that light
Yeah.
goes through
Yeah.
it, but you can't see through it.
Yeah.
So I basically bought that material from our versions of Home Depot. Then I put a metal plate that I cut out holes in, and I backlit transparency. So on the two walls that were built was a pretend wedding that I shot because I had no weddings to my name.
Oh,
And
that's
I
crazy.
bought my furniture from the Salvation Army. I bought a TAC TV that's like this big, and I built it into the wall, and that was it. And off and running. So that first year I shot 25 weddings, and the second year I shot 50, and the third year I shot 100 weddings.
That's wild.
And then there's another, and then there was a big evolution after that. But yeah, that was the introduction to my own business, basically.
There's a lot of hustle in that story that I don't want to gloss over because
There's a lot of hustle, man. I've been hustling my whole career, absolutely.
I mean, I feel like that's a huge piece of legacy in a career that lasts is hustle. And it feels like you probably got a good piece of that from your parents and the examples that they were giving you. But too often that piece in and of itself is overlooked.
I agree. One thing that I was so couple so with my dad, I've always had that youngest child relationship with my dad. My dad has a very sweet spot for me. And because I was not as familiar in the sense that I didn't work with him all day, every day, I didn't have that angst that my brothers had with him because they had worked with him and been under his reign, so to speak.
He was boss and dad.
Yeah. I mean, I was the guy, and my father still tells the famous story where, like, I wanted candy. So he would literally go to sleep at 3 or 4 in the morning. I'm going to school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I would quietly go into the bedroom, and I knew where his jeans were, and I would rattle around for some change. Every morning it was the same thing. It was like Groundhog Day. And sometimes he would get angry at me. Sometimes he would just, all right, here it is. Like, give me a note or a $5 note or something like that. But very young, I realized that, most of my friends would ask for $1 or $2 for candy. They would only ask for the money that they needed. So I said, this is no shit. At the very young age, at the age of 5 or 6, I'd ask my dad for $100. I realized that if I asked for $5 is nothing. Whereas my stupid friends would only ask for $5. I'm like, what's wrong with you?
You knew how to price anchor at the age of what?
Talk about IPS. I mean, IPS. Who came up with that acronym? It just freaking.
It's the worst acronym in the world.
Yeah, I hate it. IPS. Let's call it IPS.
It brings up such negative connotations as well, but
yes. But actually, so the story where I was going with this, So anyway, my dad always had this fun way of communicating things with me. But anyway, we went through the recession, and my dad had a choice to go bankrupt and wipe the slate clean of all his debtors and all the people that he owed money to. And he made a deal with every single one of them. And he couldn't do it.
That's incredible.
So what he did was that's when he got into the chicken shop business. And that was where it was a bit out of town and whatever. And honestly, to this day, I respect him so much that he literally paid every single one. We're talking like hundreds of thousands here. We're not talking of like a simple amount. He paid every single person back.
Wow.
And, that for me was a very important lesson because you promise stuff, you got to abide by it, and he could have taken the easy way out and he didn't. So for that reason, our family's always been very entrepreneurial. So even though that I was content working for somebody else, it wasn't like I went in with the intent to start my business one day. I was obsessed with the craft. I didn't really have the end game yet. I was just like, let me just friggin' put one foot in front of the other and have fun here. So
yeah, over the course of a 30-year career, I mean, I don't think a lot of people that step into something realize that if you want to have longevity, if you want to have a 30-year-old career and leave a legacy or 40 or 50 years old, however long you want to go, you're going to have multiple points where you lose relevance and you have to regain a sense of identity and redefine yourself. You're going to probably bottom out and have to rebuild. And along the way, there's nonstop hustle. And that was a lesson that you had going into your 20s, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah. No, it's been good. And also growing up very religious as well, it was instilled in me, as I'm sure it was you, the sense of loyalty and commitment. It's, that's just part of it. So there's certainly the nature thing, but inherently I think I'm that kind of a person. But anyone who knows me, all of my family, it's like, yep, Jerry, you've always known what you've wanted. It's almost like the same thing I've heard from any of my family without them speaking to each other. Whenever I see an old family friend or they follow me on my social media and I didn't even realize they were following me or whatever, they might say, yep, you always knew what you wanted.
Yeah.
So that's been a consistent thread with me.
What do you feel like when you had that bedroom in the chicken shop, which, by the way, was there chicken smells going in? Like, I would have to imagine the studio is filled with chicken smell.
Okay, no shit. There was chicken smell that came through to a point where sometimes I'm like, "Hey, are you hungry? I'm hungry. I think my brother's owned the chicken shop next door. This is no shit." I would grab a quarter of a chicken and chips, and I'd be chowing down, especially with album plans that would take freaking 4 hours.
Oh, I love
Um,
this.
we would do that. Just to end off that part of the story, so I ran out of space very quickly, so I acquired a
Yeah.
bit more of the storeroom, so I paid them more rent. And then finally, I'm like, I've run out of room again. I love the fact that I'm with my brothers, and every morning I'd look above the building and there was air above it. I'm like, I went to the overall landlord, okay, so the guy that my brothers were leasing from, and said, would you consider building a second level above this place? Because if you do, I'll give you X amount of rent.
Yeah.
Took me a year to convince him, and then a year for him to build it. To this day, there's the building there, right? So there's
That's
the
amazing.
glorified storeroom, and then that glorified bedroom was the lobby of our studio for many, many years. And then we built this incredible studio, and we reinvented it, and changed the name, and yeah, lots of great things happen.
Being able to work near family, I feel like that's a big thing. Whether it's friends, whether it's family, somebody that you can trust, somebody that's in your life. Because there's a lot of hard days and hard moments, and at least knowing that there are people behind you, they don't have to be doing the same thing, but at least it brings a sense of comfort and kind of that social. I don't know. You can get pretty lonely, and I think people found that out very quickly in 2020 as everybody started working from
Oh
home,
yeah,
and they're
no
like,
doubt.
man, I didn't realize that just being in an office was a part of my social life. But what did that early hustle of trying to get those first 25 and then 50 weddings, what did that look like? How are you getting these people to come in early on?
Well, it's like I have a saying, and it's been no more prudent in the last year or so. I've always, because look, I can't compare myself with people that have done that from childhood, or been hungry as a kid and always living week to week, because that's not true. Like, the first 12 years of my life, we were, I wouldn't call us rich, but we were just comfortable and lived an incredible life.
Sure.
And then it became difficult. But what I always say to photographers, like, pretend like you're hungry, not
Yeah.
not that you're full. You got to
Yeah.
pretend like you're hungry, because maybe one day you will be. And now, of course, it's happened. Everyone's like, well, shit, where's my next meal coming from? So for me, even if I'm full, metaphorically, I ask myself, what am I doing for the next meal? No matter how comfortable I am. And back then, it was literal too. It wasn't just metaphoric. I'm like, I don't want to go hungry ever again. I don't want to be sitting there being weak because I can't play squash, and I can't beat my brother because I've got no food in my belly. That's
Yeah.
just, no child should have to really go through that. And I'm one of the lucky ones, let's face it. So the hustle, and that was very logical to me, for me, because I am a people person, and I was a people person. Back then it was, well, let me find 1 degree of separation between me and the people that already have the work that I want. Because I was at the back of the chicken shop, bricks and mortar wasn't going to cut it. You are not going to pass by that street and see a sign and book a photographer for a nondescript red brick location that has no photographs and not even a window,
For
because
sure.
we had covered it up. So that's when I literally just, did my pretend wedding. And now the pretend wedding that I did, I found a dressmaker that I thought had the kind of demographic that I wanted: a suit place, a church, a car place, a florist, cake place. I went out there and did a pretend shoot. And there was no social media back then. So I'm like, hey, if you got help me out, and I'll create an album for every single one of you. I'll refer you, you refer me. Let's do it.
I want
Um,
everybody to listen to this because this is literally the playbook for building a styled shoot that networks you with vendors and creates images that your actual clients will hire you for.
it's insane to me that I literally am looking. I look at my students in the face, and I'm like, well, what are you doing for you? What are you doing for on your business rather than in it? Says, what do you
Hmm.
mean? Well, how do you getting the work in? How do you getting, what is going to keep these wheels turning? And they just look at me. I'm like, well, SEO, Facebook, Instagram. I'm like, well, it's difficult to stand out, Jerry. I'm like, well, no. In a world that we think it's difficult to stand out, one human being decides to go to a coordinator or frame that beautiful print of that gorgeous dress that you photograph and sign it and deliver it by FedEx and say, thank you for your incredible dress. You actually make my photography look good. If you ever meet a bride that would appreciate great photography and a great experience, can you refer me, please? And if so, I'll give you joint usage of the photographs. If you need a stylized shoot, let me know. By the way, I heard your daughter's getting married. Can I photograph her wedding? Like, it's not that difficult. It's just people are going to get off their ass. It's as simple as that.
I mean, how
And
much
people
more
might
of a
say,
differentiator do you feel like that is today when like, because over the years, people's social skills have gotten 10 times worse. So I feel like just doing that by itself today is so dramatic in terms of being a differentiator.
look, it's sorry for the innuendo, but the difference between porn and having sex, one is slightly amusing, the other one's a lot more fun. People are just metaphorically just happy with porn. And I'm like, well, let me just go do the real thing. Let me go out there and meet with people and have some fun. And people think, well, Jerry, it's okay for you because you're famous. No, like Pi, you and I are only arguably well known in the industry.
And
A
you're more well
segmented
known,
part of the
far more
industry.
well known than me, but yes, inside of our industry only.
No. But you walk down the street and say, "Hey, I spoke with Pi today. I spoke with Jerry today," and they're going to say, "Who the fuck is?" Oh, Pi, I said the word. Who the fuck is Jerry or Pi? They're not going to know. So what I'm getting at is that I have similar struggles just like everybody else. So when I came to Vegas, no one knows who I am here. Zero people. Now, you might Google, good wedding photographers or best wedding photographer or whatever you might Google, and maybe I might come up. But I went to Town Square here in Vegas, and I noticed this bridal boutique that I'd never seen before. And I'm like, huh. I looked I did a double take, but there's this gorgeous woman in like literally just sitting there, but it was like a fishbowl. She could clearly see that I was looking at her. Yeah. And I'm like, how am I going to approach this woman? Because she probably thinks I'm coming onto her because she is intimidatingly gorgeous, right? So I'm like, all right, I walk in. Hey, I'm Jerry Ghionis. How are you? Oh, hi. I'm like, I'm a local photographer. My wife, Melissa, and I disarm her very quickly. I lay the Australian accent thick. And I'm like, how you going, mate? How you going? I'm like, I love your dresses. I'd love to work with you. Are you the owner? She says, no. I said, well, tell me, can I meet the owner of the store? And she said, look, she'll be here tomorrow. Great. Tell me your time. I'll be back. So sure enough, I meet her. I bring the Darling book, the one that you showed me, right? The one that that you got from me. I bring it with me. I show her some work and I talk about an idea. And I said, how about we work together? Let's develop a network. Let's do it. And she goes, sounds fantastic. Now, she would probably think, all right, great. You'll get in touch and let's work it out. I said, great. Let's book in a date right now. She goes, what do you mean? I said, let's just get your calendar out. Let's book a time in 2 weeks. Let's do a shoot. And so we booked it. And then before I left, I signed something like, Sonia, can't wait to create with you. For the love of weddings, Jerry Ghionis. Signed the book. She goes, oh my God, like I've got the boutique bag. I've got a signed book from this guy. He must be somebody, whatever. Then in 2 weeks, we did a shoot. We went to the dry lake bed, did some gorgeous shots. She got the retouched images within a week. Within 2 weeks after, she had some Graphic Studio wall art hanging in every negative space in her store with printed brochures of her photographs of my contact details on one side and their contact details on the other side. Done. Next.
I love that. And I feel like today people have a tendency to overcomplicate the process, and they think of, I need to get thousands of people to follow me on social media, and I need to get, hundreds of thousands of likes and followers, and this is how I'm going to market. And they don't necessarily put the kind of pieces in place that, look, 100,000 people that are really not interested in, hiring you for your level of service is far less valuable than 10 people that are willing to. And by targeting that specific owner, that shop, that dressmaker, I mean, you're looking, I know you're looking for places that have dresses that can match the level of budget and product and experience that you would deliver. So the 100 people that come through there on a weekly basis are seeing all of your work, and that is not even arguably, that is 100% more valuable than 1 million people following you on social media.
People often equate popularity on social media with being successful, which I think is ridiculous. Um, Here's the thing, right? I probably, and this is not me, this is not ego, this is not being humble. I'm just being pragmatic. I probably have more content than probably any photographer that I know in this industry. And
Yeah.
content that I could die tomorrow and release content every day for the next 20 years and it still would be new.
Yeah.
Now, you might say, well, Jerry, why the hell aren't you sharing it? I'm just too busy. I've got my educational website. I've got social media. You probably, I don't know if you follow me, but you probably see
I
that
do
I
follow
have
you.
several breaks. I have
Yeah.
several breaks where I'm like, for my mental health, I'm like, I don't want to look at it. Even if I spend all day preparing for a month, something in my brain sometimes I just can't do it. So I just take away a trigger that will get me into a state that is not fruitful for what I want to do. So now you might say, well, Jerry, you have 80 odd thousand followers on Instagram, or you have this, that, whatever. And I'm like, well, but let's face it, being popular on social media is like being rich in Monopoly.
It truly is.
It feels good. I mean, look, shit, you've got an incredible following with SLR Lounge and what you're doing and all the cool stuff that you're doing with your iPhone, and you're showing consumers and pros alike how to get the best out of the situation, which I think is magnificent, by the way. But at the end of the day, it does not translate into. It's very rarely translates into a lot of dollars, unless you're going to that big YouTube following thing and all that kind of stuff, and you've got all this stuff. But people are getting wary of that now. They're getting wary of paid partnerships and pimping stuff and all that kind of thing. But that's another story altogether. But for me, we all have to just work out what our true version of success is. But I know that there's multi-award-winning genius photographers that have big followings that have zero money. And then you've got the humble Joe and Jane who just hard work, got 5,000 followers, and they're killing it with sales. Yeah. They're killing it. Yeah. $1 million turnovers a year and all that kind of stuff. And that they couldn't care less, because while other people are trying to be popular, and be a hero to the world, they're just being a hero to their families and clients, which is so much more valuable,
And to me, that is such a huge piece of having longevity, of sticking around, of making a difference, is being able to understand and actually put your energy and your time on the things that truly matter. Like that time that you spent in that dress shop, doing that shoot, building those relationships, that was worth every second of that time compared to whatever it is that people are trying to do on social media. And to tie this, I'll be 100% transparent. So on TikTok, I recently surpassed 1 million followers. Doing an experiment. It was an experiment of like, let me show you guys how you can game a content system, and I'm actually going to put out some education on it. Like, how can you gain a following if that is what you want to do? And I also wanted them to understand this. When I surpassed 1 million, I received more congratulatory notes and messages than I'd ever received in my entire career. Now, I have 4 incredible children. I have an amazing family now. I have helped, and with a team, we have built multiple 7-figure businesses, have thousands of happy clients. I've never received messages, or if I do, it's few and far between. But for passing 1 million, hundreds of messages came in. And I'm sitting here going, none of this actually matters. And people don't even know that this is like an experiment and a game just to see if I can do what I said I would do. But they all treat it as the measure of success. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, this is the most deceiving possible measurement of success. And the amount of revenue generated from 1 million followers, well, directly, 0. One wedding would be worth more.
Isn't that funny though? Like, that's the thing, is that we all have this misconception of what success is, and too many of us are looking at everyone's life through a filter. Yeah. People will look at Pi. Oh my God, he's done this, that, whatever. At the end of the day, I don't envy you. I got to say, I have managed don't get me wrong. I'll come back full circle, but but I've managed 15 people. I had 300 weddings a year. I had hundreds of portraits. I will never do that again. I don't want to. Yeah. I'd rather wake up and literally be in my Star Wars Grogu pajamas and do work from home and not have staff members here, if it meant making more money and doing that, or making less money and having more freedom and choice, I would prefer that. So
I
at
would
the
agree
end
with
of
you
the
100%.
day, yeah, you sort of, you get to a point where you manage so many people, you spend your entire life solving problems and putting them out fires,
Hmm.
and then you're responsible for all these families to make their money and feed their families, which is a huge responsibility. And there's people that do it with grace, like you, I'm sure, and
See, that's
they
where my
do
business
incredibly
partners come
well.
in. Because what
Yeah,
people don't
exactly.
realize is my business partner, Justin, is actually passionate about managing a business, growing a business, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not. I have
Yeah.
no interest in managing. It frankly stresses me out. I just want to create my education and I want to create imagery, and that's it. That's what I want to do. That's all.
But that's very rare. So I have that in Melissa because I used to do all of that. I used to do the bookkeeping, the numbers, the wages, you name it. I did everything. So I understand it very well. And I was pretty good at it.
Yeah,
Melissa, she just, obviously having complete trust and faith, she does everything. So
that's
that's
incredible.
the thing. There are so many business owners that do work that anyone can do. So
Hmm.
lately, I'm trying to literally cut every corner in a positive way.
Hmm.
What are the things that only I can do? Well,
Yeah,
the way I photograph, the way you photograph, only every individual can only photograph the way they photograph. Photoshop, just give it up. Why are you sitting there freaking retouching for 40 hours? What a
yeah,
waste of your time. There's all these different things. So I guess that the hustle and legacy, really is because I've surrounded myself also with people that are better than me at different things that I either don't want to do or they simply just do better. I'm like,
yeah,
well, let me pick the skills that I'm really good at and stick to those and stay in my lane. I'm also good from an entrepreneurial perspective. I'm ambitious, but I'm also protective of my happiness. So for me, I've got so many things that I can do, and people have offered me to do things, but I'm like, yeah, that's not going to make me happy. It'll make me more
yeah.
money, but it'll take me more time and money. No, 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 no. Yes, yes. Push and pull. There's a constant chess game that you play as an entrepreneur, and for your legacy, so to speak. Not that I'm out there to do a legacy. I'm just walking the path. Whatever happens, happens. But so yeah, I think there's something that's got to be said, that people have got to stop looking at other people's lives because you're looking at a filtered version. No one tells you their bad day. No one tells you that health problem that you have. No one tells you, well, some people do. No one tells you that time where you can't feed yourself and you're in a ball crying in the middle of the
Yeah.
night, or when your parents pass away, or when you have, religious adversity for different things that have happened to you. Like, so people just have this feeling, or this, oh, I want that. It's always envy. It's always like, I need more. I need more. And I'm like, I had dinner with my wife last night, and we've got two puppies, and one of them was in training, and one of them's had training, but now they're doing the training together for the last couple of days. So, we had a night off. Melissa just went through surgery a few weeks ago. She's doing well. We had a night out, had a
Good.
dinner, and we just spoke about our dreams and what we want in the future and what we're doing. And we literally just said, I don't know about you, but I am so happy right now.
Yeah.
I'm wanting for nothing.
Yeah.
And we literally talked about our goals in the future, what we want, how we're going to do it, and how thankful we are for each other and what we do. That means so much more to me than getting a huge following on social media. It's fake. Don't get me wrong. I love inspiring people, but we have to put it in perspective. Have to put it in
Absolutely.
perspective.
Well, one of the things that I mean, many of the things that you said in there are so poignant, and I want to draw attention to specifically as you have become more, and as a person becomes more successful in anything they do, every step of success makes it more meaningful and more important that you say no to the things that, like, there's just so many. As you're more successful, there's more opportunities, and
Yep.
so many of those opportunities are going to pull you away from who you are, what you value. So I'm kind of running backwards and tallying, like, Jerry has this personality and upbringing that combines into this empathetic person. He chooses a genre of photography. He loves the craft, the art of photography, and chooses a genre that very much fits who you are. And you know those values, you know who you are, and you, with each step in success, you kind of are choosing the things that you don't want to do, or the things that don't tie into who that person is. Now, going back, because you mentioned that, I actually do remember part of your story from, I believe, when we were chatting on the phone. But you, in Australia, before you left, this was, I believe, when you were still married in your first marriage, you had a studio that was shooting 300 plus weddings, that was doing tons of albums, and you had a full team. What was that like?
It's funny. I wanted to be the biggest studio in Australia, and it wasn't even an ego thing. It was because I think I could. I
Yeah.
don't know I don't know. I was hungry for the journey and the ride. I'm like, it wasn't really like, and from a business perspective, I said to myself, if you're getting married and you want photography and video, that Excite photography and video, Excite spelled with an X, so X-S-I-G-H-T, Excite.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone will know who Excite is.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened. You know, we were on the back cover of, like, part of our marketing strategy was to actually get the back cover of every bridal magazine. And at one point we had every cover.
That's crazy.
We were in fashion editorials. We were on I developed, I mean, I've probably shot 50 plus covers now of magazines in my career. So and then as I got to a point early in my career when at the back of the chicken shop where I was booked, I was sick of saying, I'm booked, I'm booked, I'm booked, I'm booked.
Yeah.
Then I had someone knock on my door and want to assist me. And then he did that. And then he worked for me full time. And then I got 5 years out of him. But we got to a point where we had 15 staff members. We had 3 full-time Photoshop people, production people, receptionists, shooters, editors, filmmakers. I mean, it was a big team, big for our industry, not like corporate big, but big for our industry. And part of me loved it. Part of me said, "What the hell am I doing?" I sort of very quickly found that success, but it's not how much money you make; it's how much you get to keep. So you've said to me about getting 7-figure businesses. Doesn't mean that you're making $1 million.
No.
You might have to turn over $1 million to make 50 grand. You know what I mean? Like,
it can get
people don't understand.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't. So you could be more successful making it, grossing 100, netting 30, rather than grossing $1 million and being in debt 100. So for me, it took me a very, very, very long time to make the. In fact, I don't think I ever did. The money that I was making on my own was so much greater, netting wise, than it took me a long time to develop that team to a point where I was netting the same money with less problems and less fires I had to put out. So as you grow, you spend your whole time putting out fires. And the only release that I had was shooting the wedding. That's where I could be creative because I see the difference is with me. The reason why I believe I'm a good entrepreneur and is that I find the creativity in business. A pure creative artist just doesn't see the parallel. And that's why when I teach people, I'm like, well, creatively, how would you get a client?
Yeah.
Creatively, how do you do that, whatever? So I got to the point where I wasn't enjoying it as much. And my brother bought into the business. And then eventually he bought me out completely in 2007. But, it was 10 years. From the back of the chicken shop until I sold it, it was 10 years, excuse me. And then I opened up a studio on the docks of Melbourne, not Docklands. And it was in the middle of a 3-floor reception room venues. Like, basically a big company rented the entire pier from the government. These old sheds made them into these incredible venues. And I had secured a space in there as well, outfitted, built the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's when I created more of a boutique personal service again. But then I quickly, was traveling to the US many, many times, fell in love with an American after my divorce, and that was it. So obviously lots of in between stuff, but that's the quick story of that next chapter.
well, so much of, during, I was in And again, like, not, this isn't to put, like you said earlier, that you're not putting fault on anything. This is just two people in a very unhealthy marriage. I found work, regardless of the fires and the issues and everything, to be a complete welcome distraction from everything else in my life. So it was easy to scale and to grow and to throw all of myself into it because I had nothing away from work that I wanted to spend time doing.
Right.
Did that play into a part of like this kind of ambition that you had, like in terms of, because you said I could, I wanted to because I could.
Well, yes, it started off by I had to hustle because I literally was hungry. So it started off by just doing it because I had to. Then, the marriage wasn't terrible. It was just vanilla.
Mm,
But I just didn't have that joy that I have now, nowhere near it. And this is no disrespect to my former partner. It's just that, yes, there's no doubt that what gave me happiness was the process of
yeah.
photography and the process of business and getting new clients. And as I was getting unhappier, even though that I made room, like it wasn't like, well, Jerry, perhaps your marriage failed because you were spending too much time in the business. I gave it every chance. I literally even bought a holiday house an hour and a quarter away. I bought a block of land on a golf course. We ended up building a house. Let's spend weekends there, whatever. And part of my selling that a big business at the end of the day was also to help, save my marriage in my brain so we can have more time together and shoot less weddings. And that certainly wasn't it. But there's no doubt that the joy of the process of business and the weddings and the portraits and all those things actually certainly helped me be very successful. So part of my misery was a gift.
Yeah.
So, but pragmatically, that's just a fact.
That's a funny thing about, well, people that have never gone through a divorce. There's every type of situation that can lead into that, but the people that have never gone through it, or they haven't faced an unhappy relationship, they can only look at it from one side, which is generally you just didn't put in the effort. You didn't put enough time into it. And what people don't realize is that, well, in the process of writing this book on relationships, if you have a bad relationship, pouring in more time is a fuel that's going to lead to a disaster that much quicker. It's like you have, water, and you're pouring water into something expecting to get good experiences out of it. But if that thing soaks up all of the water, like your quality time, you get nothing out of it, and it becomes that much more draining. I don't think people realize the missing pieces there, and you can't just, there's no like, oh, just put in more effort and everything's going to work out fine. That's generally not how it works. So,
Well, I mean, that's the comment too, though, that I think that you and I were brought up with. So from a religious perspective, it was always taboo. You just don't get divorced. That's just not an
yeah,
option.
yeah.
So it never came into my brain until literally like probably a year before I broke up, like 15 years into it. It was just never an option. I will just
Hmm.
be one of those people in a relationship that will be unhappy for the rest of their life and find some joy and hang on to it. And, but yeah, I never wanted to be that divorce guy for religious reasons, for the shame of it, or, just, yeah, I didn't want to be that divorce guy. But I
Yeah, me
realized
too.
that life
For
was
me,
too short, and that was it.
it was a critical failure. Like it took almost basically, losing my life to realize like, hey, there has to be a better option than this.
Yeah.
But so at that point, I mean, you had learned so much at that point, and then you left to come over to the States. When did the education start coming along? And maybe Mike, can you pull up some of Jerry Get Education as you kind of talk about it? Because what's fascinating about your education is how it builds in all of these different life experiences, and you're learning photography, but you're also learning so much more. You're learning from 30 years of being a human.
Yeah, it's funny because I built this big studio very quickly in my career. I was always very much one of the youngest, if not the youngest in my industry to achieve something. So here is this young Greek guy that came out of nowhere and now is on the cover of all these magazines, doing all these editorials, getting all this business, and all the established studios are like, well, shit, like I'm losing business to Jerry, and well, who's this guy? So the lab at the time, we've got this one of the pillars in our industry who's been sort of like been a figure in our industry for so many years. He had a lab that we used to work with, and he was doing he wanted me to do a seminar. Hey Jerry, share some ideas on what you do, because that people could learn from you, because the labs, they know if someone's just showboating, or they know how much work you put in. So he knew exactly what we were putting in, and like, Jerry, this is not normal. And I had no measure. I didn't know what was normal. I didn't really care. I'd like, let me just run my own race. So I did a seminar at this lab, and he would normally get 20, 30 people. And I remember it to this day. I wish I had a photo of it, actually. It was packed to the gills. Like, it was 203 people. And literally, like, the first person in the row was right in my face. Like, it was that packed. So
That's
then
crazy.
people said, well, Jerry, you have a bit of a knack of communicating effectively and efficiently. You're not really a book smart teacher. You're more of a wisdom, street smart teacher. And I had never really had a measure. I'm like, well, I don't know, this is how you do it. How do I know that? Because I've screwed up, and I think that that's the problem. So I guess I just pitched an idea, or anything that I communicate with, like any decent teacher, I think it's not like what I say is fact. For me, it's fact. For me, I believe this will work most of the time for these amount of reasons, most, from experience. So anyway, that led to another gig, to another gig, to another gig. And then I'm like, I really, really love imparting my knowledge.
Interesting.
And it wasn't for the ego. It wasn't for, Jerry's popular, or, like Rocky, running down the streets of Philadelphia and everyone saying hello to him. It was purely, I loved making a difference. For me, my elevator pitch is very, very, very simple. Just, I love bringing out the best in others, whether it's making you look and feel beautiful, or creating something meaningful, or whether it's helping you feed your family, or whether it's, understanding perspective from different relationships, or whatever it may be. So I quickly learned that. And then one gig turned into the other, to the other, to the other. And then finally, that's when I got exposed to the American market. So back then, one of the Australian album manufacturers said, Jerry, you've really got some good stuff. We should just do a few cities in the US. I'm like, very exotic, right? So we did a few cities, and then it just started to grow and grow and grow. And this is when, internet was hardly, the internet was there, but it's not like social media. Like, it was literally, you had to have a database, or your lab had to ring people up, or it had to be the hustle of trying to get people in the door. So, and that's
is
when
this
it started
early
to
2000s
grow.
that you were doing that? When was
Yes.
this time frame? Early 2000s?
Yeah, so
Okay.
that particular seminar was in 2000, and then early 2000s is when I started to do those seminars in and around Australia, and then overseas. And that's when the crowd started to build and build and build and build,
That's fascinating. By the time that I had seen you speak, that was 2008. So you were very well versed and polished at that point. You were standing in front of all of WPPI lecturing.
Yeah, well, that opened up my eyes dramatically. I had entered into WPPI for the very first time because I heard about this big organization. It was very exotic to me. Wedding and Portrait Photographers International, whatever. And I'm like, and at that time, I was obsessed with just trying to be the best I could be. I'm like, all right, hell, I'll enter. So, and I ended up winning the album of the year, first place. And I freaked out. Then I got invited to speak the following year. So that I did. And at that point I started hearing about Dennis Reggie and Joe Busink and a few others.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking at the same time as Dennis Reggie. I'm like, well, there's no one to come to me. He shot the Kennedys. I shot friggin' Tom and Lucy from the northern suburbs of Melbourne. But people started to hear about, the award and what I had done. And, the Australians like Yervant and myself, probably Yervant and myself were the main ones, then Marcus Bell. And obviously you've got the likes of Rocco and then Ryan, a few others. But we were among the first of the Australians to really influence the culture outside of Australia, to bring that fashion, almost posed photojournalism approach to the industry.
Yeah.
So there I was expecting like no one in the crowd, barely, if I had 30 people, whatever. So I had no expectations, like zero. It was packed. And I had the foresight to actually photograph. At the time, I photographed the empty environments that I was faced with, because I had no measure of what other photographers did. So I had this, and again, I think this is because you photograph the way you are as a person. I always look at the positives, not the negatives. So when someone walks into a shitty house, all they see is a shitty house. I'm just seeing beautiful pockets of light and negative space.
Yeah.
So I had this knack of repopularizing the turning the ordinary into the extraordinary. And then back then, MacGyver was like the shit. Like MacGyver was the big TV show that we all grew up with. So I'm like, what would MacGyver do if he was to photograph a wedding? So I had used these different analogies in teaching, and I was probably one of the only photographers that had the foresight to photograph on a wedding the behind the scenes, environments that I'd work with.
Yeah.
And it
You
became
were.
extremely powerful
Yeah.
because everyone was like, well, shit, you got that out of that, or that girl is that girl,
Yeah.
So, and to this day, people think I shoot high-end weddings and I only photograph gorgeous people, which is just untrue. Like, barely 5 weddings of my 1,000+ weddings have been high-end. The rest are just normal people.
Yeah.
So it's really so that opened up my eyes to a big world in education. I think the problem today is that everyone wants to be an educator or a mentor, and I think for the wrong reasons. It's for the popularity of it, but it's an important responsibility. The problem is that people do it too prematurely, and everything starts with a good story. Like, I have quite a depth and breadth to the story that you're exposing right now, but I have real world experience. Some people will do a workshop or do online training. All of a sudden, well, I know it now. Let me teach it. And the internet will quickly disprove your perspective, and it'll quickly separate the good from the great, or whatever you want to call it. So, but America was a huge turning point for me, because I realized that we, with such an incredible talent pool in Australia, we had pushed each other so much to be, to really, who's going to outdo the other in a very respectful way, to a point where I came to the States. I'm like, well, no one's doing stuff like this. It's all posed. It's all quite dry and mechanical. And then we started introducing this bit of a flair and a flamboyance to this industry,
Yeah, that was a very interesting time, because I remember that was, I believe, 2009. I'm sorry, 2009 was my very first WPPI. Before we had really opened the business or anything, we opened that year, and that was a time where you could actually see the kind of going out of traditional photography and the coming in of this next generation, of this new era, which was largely led by yourself. I remember seeing Yervant. I remember seeing several people that first year that were kind of leading this path. But in the meantime, half the lectures you'd go to were the stepbrother shots. It was the still traditional like type photographs that wedding photography was no longer becoming, or was going in a different direction. But I do distinctly remember that you were the first that I ever saw that was actually doing behind the scenes. And it was the first time somebody could easily, at least someone like myself, could easily see this was the scene and this is what a trained eye would see. Because up until that point, all you saw was like, stuff in books that would just say, here's the final image and, this is the settings for that image. But you were actually marrying the idea of like, no, this is what this looks like, and having vision and technique can take you here. Side note, I do 100% agree in terms of education. I feel like everything, what you said earlier, like you can't get to 10 years of experience without first starting at 1 year of experience. There's that piece of it. But a lot of people, same thing with the way that they enter photography, enter the world of education with a misaligned set of values. Their values are towards, like you said, becoming popular, gaining likes, or they're just, hey, I might be able to make some money, doing this thing. And just like photography, it doesn't happen unless you can have longevity to it. It doesn't happen unless you can stick around and actually become known as that thing. So
100%.
I have to imagine in your career, you've seen a lot of faux educators. Is now more than any other time? Or do you feel like it's the same as it always has been?
Yeah, look, Well, let me preface this by saying I do not begrudge anyone trying to feed their family. So
Yeah.
if this is a vehicle for you to do that, great. But knowing that if it doesn't come from an authentic place and or educated place, then you just won't have longevity. Therefore, taking your eye off your own business to try to help someone with theirs, I think is just plain wrong for yourself and for them.
Yeah.
Unless you make it a legitimate business, like for example, you guys, you SLR and you do all your educational offerings, all the things that you do, like I, when I first launched what was then called the ICE Society, Inspire, Challenge, Educate, that was like literally about a month or two ago, 13 years ago. Like I think I was only second to Kelby. I thought I was the first, and like Kelby's, oh, well, you know what? Damn it, you were the first.
That was one of the very first platforms, iSociety.
Yeah. So for me, like, so what I'm getting at is this. So for me, and let me tell you how it started and why I did it. It wasn't like, well, let me make all this money. It was when I was traveling to all these seminars and all around the world. I was that guy that put my email up on the screen and said, you got a question? Just ask me. I'm like, it was very innocent. Anyway, it got to the point where I was spending half of every day telling people how to expose better, how to light better, how to photograph a groom, how do I do this, that, whatever. I'm like, this is just stupid. Ultimately, you just want to see a professional work. Let me start filming my weddings, because I had filmed a few weddings and made DVDs, if people remember what that is. So I had so I basically did that. Where was I going with this shit? What was I saying?
The start of iSociety.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So then I said, well, let me look into developing a website that is a subscription model, and then you just pay to be online, and then I'll just share monthly content, and I'll do it. And sure enough, I did. And to this day, I've released content every single week for the past 13 years.
That's crazy.
So, and again, a lot of people, would say, well, Jerry, you should share all of that on social media. And I probably should. It's just that, if you've invested in me, as in you're paying for a membership, my priority is on you. If you're investing in me as a client, as in you want me to photograph by me, you're my priority. So for me, I could literally release thousands of hours of content, and the amount of stuff that I've done in the past year, I can't even tell you. But it's just a process. It is what it is. But that's why I started it, and to this day, it's certainly it has its ups and downs and challenges, but it's a long-term commitment. Like, you are married to this concept for a long time. But yeah, I think that educators out there, or prospective educators, you have to usually be the most experienced person in the room. That you need to come from a place that is you and yours, and have a good story to tell. Otherwise, you'll quickly be eaten up by your audience. Like, I've never taught Photoshop. I just think it's a waste of time. I know how to pay someone to do it. I know how to direct it. I will teach you how to pay someone to do it. And I never teach something that I don't know about. Like how to color balance a monitor. I don't know how to do that. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
There's plenty of other people that do action keys. That's just not me. So, come from a good place, make it authentic, have a good story, but make sure that that if you take your time away from your business to do that, and even now, there's so much free education out there that you will find what you want for free. You guys do so much free education. Clubhouse, you can ask any question and get answers from world-class people for free.
Clubhouse is hilarious.
But you're taking time away from your family and stuff. So you got to just be careful. So when it comes to longevity, people have asked me, Jerry, and I say this humbly, that they said, Jerry, a lot of people in your peer group when you started are not around anymore. Sure. Or they're no longer as relevant. How have you stayed relevant? Because I'm playing chess. Yeah. Your people are photographing or teaching. I'm playing chess. There's times where I'm aggressive. There's times I pull back. There's times where I fade. I sidestep. I change genre. I do whatever. And it's not because I want to stay relevant to the community. I'm trying to keep myself interested and make myself last. To be interested as a teacher and as a photographer. So for me, there's a push and pull game. It's not full steam ahead all day, every day, from a let me be popular perspective. It is no, how do I do things that will help me keep on doing this forever and have choices in my life, you know?
Yeah, it's fascinating because the kind of you have evolved and redefined yourself so many times across your career, from being a solo entrepreneur to then running a studio, to with a full team, to then backing off and focusing on a boutique service, to then stepping into the world of education and becoming known on that side while still shooting, then launching multiple platforms. I've seen you launch multiple products at WPPI, all of which are fantastic. I have to say, iSociety, I was a member of that for I think 3 or 4 years, and I still to this day highly recommend it. And there's something about, you know, people can go onto YouTube and waste their time looking for videos, and we have plenty of free content too. But there's a huge difference in content that's actually designed with purpose versus like edutainment. You know, like most of what you find out there is just basically edutainment.
Right.
Whereas when you log into iSociety, I remember getting to see you working in and out on every single shoot and watching how you communicated. And that was when I learned, okay, Jerry is being Jerry and he's communicating in his fashion, and I have to figure out how to be that comfortable in my own, you know, shoes, like with who I am. And it was in watching you communicate time in and time out. That was the most valuable piece of that education. But we're gonna again cut in the, you know, website, and those that are listening or watching will have all the links in the description below. But I highly recommend it. So
Thank you.
at that standpoint, from that place, and mind you, when you're saying like you kind of just tried out education, that's very similar to how we got into education. You put your email out onto things. We were building a team, and every team member was coming in, and I was saying the same thing over and over to them. So I thought, why not just make some videos about this and I'll post it onto YouTube? And within a year, we had like 50,000 people on YouTube, and we're like, well, let's just launch a website. And within a year, we figured out how to monetize it later on, but it was really just, I didn't want to keep saying the same things over and over. And then realizing, okay, I kind of enjoy this. I like actually teaching and making a difference, and stepping into it from that side. But when did your involvement with WPPI come into it? Because you have a very significant role in that conference.
Yeah, man. I guess so. When I first entered that competition and I ended up winning the album of the year, and then the year after, I've been there ever since, which is like 2002 to this day.
Yeah,
So what had happened was that for me, WPPI was my reward for a solid year, for working hard,
yeah,
being creative. And often I would photograph a wedding and I'm like, man, this is going to be the wedding album of the year today. Like I would
that's
say it
awesome.
out loud to my
Yeah,
assistant. This is going to be the wedding album of the year. This is going to win the print of the year. Not in an ego way. It was more like I just need just something to drive me. I'm very competitive as a person. I don't
yeah,
mind losing at all. I'm actually I actually prefer to chase than than lead because it's more
yeah.
fun in anything. But so then at one point WPPI for me was I met some of my best friends all over the world. I had as an entrant, I was entering for, every single year, and it made a significant impact on me as a person, as a educator, as an artist. And when you grow up really well, you just want other people to grow up in the same way. That's really it. And it was a purely a selfless perspective to then say, well, how else can I help? So what had happened was that I had, obviously I released the ice slides and I released pickpockets,
Mm-hmm.
the cards and all DVDs. There was a whole breadth of things that I've done all over the years. Then I'm at that point where, we did a trade show. I did a lot of the keynote discussions. Um, got to the point where I started hosting the awards night. I got involved in the competition as a judge, as a chairperson, and then there was a threat that WPPI was going to go down. Like it was no longer going to be an entity, and I'm like, what a shame. I grew up in that family. What a shame that people can't do the same thing that I did, as in grow
Yeah,
up in that space. So there is certainly a sentimental attachment there, as I'm sure with you and many others. So as we felt that the competition might die because it's not a profitable entity, we were potentially going to create our own competition with, relevant rules and relevant categories. And then finally, Jason Group at the time was a director of WPPI. Was sort of just, he had a rough night and a rough week, and due to some issues and problems, and with the competition and awards night. And then I just said to him, I go, let's help you. So I was stupid enough to offer to help. It took me 6 months to rewrite the rules. I said, I'll only do this if you reinvent the master's program. Now, can you imagine retroactively looking what every single person had entered since the beginning of WPPI, creating a system where a certain number of points will go towards a designation, and then all of a sudden you can become an associate, a master, a double master, triple master, grandmaster,
yeah.
And then win, you can win certain categories and award, all that stuff. Because I was the most successful, entrant in their history. So I'm like, it's time to give back now. So, and anyway, cut a long story short.
I don't think a lot of people know that.
Oh yeah, that doesn't matter. It's all fine.
It matters to me because for a time, like I think people think that everybody behind the scenes is getting paid significant sums of money to do what they do, and they think that this is a money grab. This is anything but.
We got paid zero. I think they looked after us here and there with booth space, but there was no here. Like I'm telling you, I took like 6 months out of my life was reinventing the entire competition from the ground up. I said, well, we need a separate website. We need verbiage. We need the rules that are relevant, categories that are relevant, and retroactively understanding all the master's designation was a nightmare. But I said that's the only way that I'll do it, because I'll believe in it. But I think it had outgrown the industry, because then pre-wedding photography was huge, newborn was huge, and so anyway, so we did that. And because, legally we weren't getting paid, so we still entered, right? So I could still enter. And people were like, well, how do you enter? And you're running, well, I don't choose who wins. The judges do that.
Yeah.
But you can imagine choosing judges, choosing print handlers, print hangers. We counted one year, Melissa sent over 1,000 emails for one competition alone. Like
that's insane.
Then we got to a point where we're starting to live in Vegas now. And then we said, don't worry, like, why don't you send the prints to us? Why would you send them to New York and then freaking send them to Vegas? That's stupid.
Oh my gosh.
We'll do it. To this day, like, all the prints come to our house and we sort the prints out and put them in the order and barcode them and put them in crates ready to go. So
you're still doing this.
So we're still, this year we've committed to doing it again. Like,
that's
trust
wild,
me,
dude.
it's not because I like it. I like inspiring people, and I like an easier vehicle for this process to happen. But anyway, there's one point a few years ago where we did everything. I did the keynote, I had the trade show booth, I was Nikon, all the other sponsors, I was hosting the awards night, I did the awards night script, queued up the music.
Oh my goodness.
Chair people, print hangers, govern the competition, manage the judges. I was exhausted, and I'm like, I can't do this. It was the first year I didn't enjoy it. And then we pulled back with our responsibilities 1 year, and then a year after we balanced it. Okay, because if something happened to us, the whole system would crumble.
Mm-hmm. So
we made sure that, all right, we documented our process. This is what happens here, and made sure that everyone knows. We balanced the responsibility to a point where, we've got a backup solution for everything. We've got a system, and it's sustainable. Again, longevity, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we're up to. So, it's been great. Now I can no longer enter because they do pay us a little bit to make it happen these days.
Yeah.
So legally I can't enter, which part of me is sad, because not for the ego thing, but it's the way I grew up. I'm like,
side.
It's a competitive, and again, it's not like I'm trying to beat you. I'm just trying to beat myself. I just want to make sure that I have a symbol for that process. So, but anyway, that's another story. But yeah, man, it's all good from that perspective.
Well, it's slated for the end of the year this year, right? For August? Is it August?
August.
August. Okay.
Yeah, look, hopefully I mean, they're going to be going by like Nevada rules. So
Yeah.
if Nevada says you can have a convention over X amount of people, they'll do it. So it's not really up to WPPI, it's up to the local, the state's governing rules as to whether it goes ahead or not. So at the moment, it's on the cards, and we've said yes to looking after the prince and the judges and all that stuff. So let's wait and see. Yeah.
Man, I can't wait. I hope everything goes smoothly. I hope we can gather again, because not being able to do it really is quite saddening. It's one of those things that everybody, I think, in the industry looks forward to getting together. Some people are there to learn. Some people are there to meet back up with old friends. Some people are there to present. But it had something for everybody. And I appreciate you, my friend. I appreciate you, and I can't wait to see you at WPPI in August.
Can't wait. Absolutely.
But thank you for everything that you have done for the industry. You have personally impacted my life among thousands of others for the better in so many different ways. So I am glad to be able to have you on here to give a little bit of a tribute to you. And for those that are listening or watching, Jerry has so many awesome, fantastic products and services, website, photos, everything. Darling, you're still selling Darling, right? It's still available?
Yeah, the Darling book. Yeah, it's right here. So, yep, 100%. We can sign it for you and all that kind of stuff. But there's so many things we do, man. It's just there's too much.
I know. So we're gonna link up all of it in the show notes and in the description. So you guys have to check out everything. And then, yeah. Well, I hope to see all of you guys, and I hope to see you, Jerry, back at WPPI in August.
Well, man, that didn't hurt at all. I thought you were going to go deeper than that, man. I'm ready to drop some bombs there, and I'm like, well. You didn't go there, and you didn't go there, and I'm like, I think you're going soft on me. I don't know what's going on, but
this was our part one, an introduction to Jerry, and part two, when you're coming through LA. I totally forgot that you guys actually moved out to Vegas, and I think Melissa actually told me in my first email, and I forgot again. I was all excited. I'm like, oh, Jerry could probably just drive down from Los Angeles.
Well, you emailed me 2 days ago. Why don't you just drive over? I'm like, dude. It's like 4.5 hours away, and then it's like, oh, and I had a feeling you either didn't remember,
I didn't remember. It was one of my. When you are passing through, let's do it. Let's do a part two in person. Let's get even deeper.
100%, man. There's lots of other stories to tell, but yeah, man, absolute pleasure working with you. I have so much respect for you and what you've done in the industry and what you continue to do. Being a voice of reason, and just I love your approachability. I love what you're doing on social media, and it's sort of, to be honest, like you sharing your stuff on social media. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I got to get off my ass. I've got so much cool stuff to share. I got to get out there and do it. So you're one of the very few people in the industry that makes me feel lazy. So. Because when I do watch social media, your name will come up. I'm like, oh yeah, look, I've got so much cool stuff like that. Damn it, I got to share it.
I would say, Jerry, just do you, but honestly, we'd all be better served if you were posting more. So if you can manage it and keep your sanity, then please post more often, because I love every one of your posts.
Well, it's been fun because the last year I've been photographing a lot of performers. So ironically, here in Vegas, I'm known as a more portrait fashion photographer. People actually don't know me for weddings here that much, to be honest. So people come to me as the portrait fashion guy and the performer guy now, having worked on these recent projects. So it's been fun to pivot from that perspective in many, many ways. So it's a fun ride. So I'll tell you in part two, that next phase.
I can't wait to talk about it, dude. I feel like we can sit down for another 2 hours easily and talk about all of your awesome experiences. But I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Jerry, for coming on. Appreciate you as a human being, as an educator, everything that you do for our industry.
Thank you, mate. I appreciate it. It's we'll see you next time.
All right, Jerry. See ya.